Hello from the Battery Wine Cellar. My name is Joe Holcomb. I work here in the membership department of the Battery. And I'm happy to welcome you all to the vertical tasting of the Mascot. We want this to be an interactive wine tasting. So, please feel free to take your cameras off mute your microphones off mute, your cameras on, and engage with us. I want to introduce, of course, Daniel Cameron, who's the Chef Sommelier here at the Battery. And then also Anthony, who's the director of the Mascot. And we're going to go through some of these exciting wines today. So I'll turn it over to Dan and then on to Anthony. Welcome, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for those of you who have participated in the past with these great virtual events, making some sense of normalcy out of this very strange time. I definitely see a light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully, perhaps this will be the last virtual event. So hopefully we can get you back in person. We're definitely striving for that here. Likewise, to echo Joe's comments, I wanted to welcome Anthony and the Mascot team and thank them for all of their amazing hard work and everything that they've done to make this possible. We're very excited, and I know Anthony will probably talk a little more about this, but we here at the Battery had a very special opportunity to have a special release of the last wine of 2016, which I know he'll get to. But I just wanted to kind of reiterate how special and unique this opportunity is for all of you and for us at the Battery, and to thank them again. So without further ado, I think, Anthony, the show is yours. We are here to listen and learn and taste the amazing wines. And also, I don't know if Will is listening in somewhere, but a big shout out to Will Harlan. Thank you so much, as always, for making these things possible. And we're just so grateful to have amazing wines and amazing members like yourself. So thank you so much. So with that, Anthony, please take it away.
Great, thank you both, and thank you for the introduction. This is exciting to be partnering with you and tasting the wines with your members. So thank you everyone for attending. I think I see Jeff Yasuda in who's one of the people who logged in, and I actually know Jeff from a previous life. So that's fun, Jeff. If you're there, I'm no longer just the tech guy. I'm the wine guy now. So we should catch up afterward. So that's a small world.
Dude.
Hey, how are you?
What's going on?
I'm doing well.
I was trying to be incognito tonight, but go do it. Do your thing.
Yeah, I couldn't let you get away with that. So Jeff, it's actually a nice introduction, I think, to myself and how I got here. I'm born and raised in Napa and had worked in the wine industry for the beginning of my career, then decided to go work in tech for about 12 years, first at Google and then second starting my own company in the consumer electronics and music space. And did that for a while until I was able to hire a team to run that day to day, and made the decision to come work with the Harlan family, who I've known for a while. And here I am as director of the Mascot. I've been in the role for about a year now. Grew up around wine. My family's in the industry. Grew up with the Harlan family. So wine is in my blood and something that I've wanted to get back into for a long time now. So it's exciting to be here and leading you all through our wines.
Amazing. Congratulations, by the way. So nice to see you.
Thank you. You as well.
I'm cooking, so I'm going to put myself.
Okay. I hope you enjoy the wines. I
can't wait.
I'm very excited for this tasting for everyone here, and to echo what Daniel said, really would love to make it interactive to the extent that people have questions. Feel free to ask me at any point. We've been doing a lot of these over the past year, given the pandemic, and this is the best way for us all to engage. So I've found that it's the best when people are ready to ask questions, and I'm ready for any questions at any time. So feel free to chime in at any point. This is special because we've actually never done a 4 vintage vertical tasting with a group. So this is the first time we're ever doing it. So really exciting. I want to talk a little bit about the Mascot and how it got started, where the wine comes from, and I think that'll speak to why a vertical tasting is so exciting for the Mascot specifically. So the Mascot was started by Will Harlan, who's the second generation of the Harlan family, someone who I've known for a long time growing up. And When Will was in college in the early 2000s, he would come back to Oakville for the summers. And he started, along with our director of wine growing, Corey Empting, had this idea that we have these younger vines. At that point, it was from Harlan Estate and Bond, two of the family's first properties. And there were these younger vines that the family wasn't using. We weren't putting that fruit into the grand vins, as we call them, because they didn't quite have the sense of place that we were looking for those wines. But Will and Corey both felt that they could produce really amazing wines, even at that younger age. So Corey and Will got together and took a few barrels of the younger vine fruit from the 5 estates of Bond and from Harlan Estate and made a blend, specifically of these younger vines that were 5 to 12 years of age. And in the beginning, it was unlabeled. They were Shiner bottles that Will would bring around to parties and introduce to people in his network. And over time, it developed a bit of a following. And Will thought that maybe he could turn this into something that they could introduce to the world. So he went to his father and asked if he could start something with these younger vine fruit in this blend. And his father, Bill, said, okay, you can start it, but it can't have the Harlan name anywhere on it. It has to be completely independent. You can't put Harlan on the label. It can't be the Mascot by Harlan. This has to be its own endeavor. So Will said, okay, and went to the story behind the label, if you've seen with the dog on it, plays into the name of the wine, which Will decided before our first official release. So all of the labels of the Harlan family are stock level engravings. So Bill has a large collection of stamps and other stock engravings that he selects for each of the labels. And Will wanted to pay homage to that, but also wanted to have his own kind of stamp on something that he was starting. So he went to this huge archive of stock engravings and found, as he was flipping through this dog that was on a banknote from the Bank of Pittsburgh in the 1920s. So the dog that's on the label, and I'll share my screen in a second and show some of this, is actually a real dog who existed in the 1920s in Pittsburgh and used to greet patrons as they came into the bank, and was beloved by the people who worked there and went to softball games and eventually got known as the mascot of the bank. So Will really liked that story. The family has always taken to dogs. Some of the things around character and loyalty and friendship that dogs embodies are things that Will wanted this team and this wine to embody as well. So he chose the name The Mascot, and you see Prince there, the dog, on the label. So that was back, like I said, in the early 2000s. Our first official release was 2007. The first release that really made it out into the world was 2008. At that point, we were only making about 500 cases of wine a year, not enough to really introduce it at scale across the world. And over the past 10 years, we've been able to start making a bit more wine. Our 2015 vintage is 3,000 cases. And the 2016 vintage, which is a given year in Napa in general, is 5,000 cases. So we have just enough wine now to get it out across the world and to be building a team to tell the Mascot story. So really excited to taste you guys through these wines. What I thought I'd do is share my screen quickly and show you a few things that I think will help explain a bit about where the Mascot comes from and how the wine is made, which I'd like to talk through next. So I will share my screen quickly. Let's just bring up, let's start. Is everyone able to see this map here? Great. So this is a map of the Napa Valley. It's not in great perspective to see, so I'll scroll through it. But essentially, if you center yourself on the map here, towards the upper left is going north up towards St. Helena and Calistoga, and then down towards the bottom right is going south towards Oakville. And this is a map that shows where all of the Mascot fruit comes from. So I mentioned that when the Mascot was started, it was from the younger vines of Harlan Estate and Bond. Harlan Estate is the family's first endeavor. It's 40 planted acres of hillside fruit in Oakville. That was the result of Bill coming to Napa in the 1980s and searching to make a first growth of Napa Valley. Shortly after, he started looking for other unique sites across Napa And after looking at more than 100 sites, started working with 5 particular sites that became the Cruise of Bond. So Bond is an endeavor of 5 different locations in Napa, all hillside fruit, that after working with 100 or more different growers and sites, that Bill felt was the best expression of Napa. So we have Vicina down here, which is close to Harlan Estate in Oakville, St. Eden, which was the second property acquired over near the Vaca Mountain Range, Melbury up towards Lake Hennessy, Quella further north in the Vacas, and then Pluribus over on the Mayacamas Mountain Range near Calistoga. So all 5 of these are 7 to 10 acre plots that are 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, and they're individual wines. We take the younger vines from each of those and bring them into the blend for the Mascot. Finally, the family's latest endeavor is Promontory, which is a large territory of 800 acres. It's very rugged and wild with a lot of forest, but these amazing hillside sloping vines that we were able to plant close to 80 acres, which now are just getting to the point where we have the younger vines that are moving into the blend of the Mascot, which is one of the reasons that we're able to make a bit more wine. So we take all of the younger fruit from these 3 locations, and each year we bring the younger fruit together. And the first step in the process, because people ask often about how the wine is actually made, and each of the wines is made in its own winemaking practice that is specific to the land. So the Harlan Estate team will take the younger vines of Harlan Estate and actually ferment them and barrel them, go through the whole vinification process as if it was Harlan Estate wine. And it's not until after the wine has been put in barrel and aged that we actually bring it together to make the final blend. So each of these wines is made just like the parent properties of the estates. Then we bring all of the fruit together of the younger vines. We select the best barrels. A lot of the younger fruit does not go into the Mascot. It's only a selection of what we think are the finest barrels and plots that make it into the Mascot. So we bring it all together. It's normally done at Promontory. All sit down and have a big blending session to put together what we think is the best expression of the vintage. And that becomes the Mascot. I will show here as well. You can see prints here. This is the banknote that has become the label. And you can see the Farmers Deposit National Bank in Pittsburgh with prints on there. So that's, it's a real stock certificate that the family was able to get about 10 of them. And we have them, like to show people that it's a real stock certificate. So I'll pause here for a second before we get into the wines and see if there's any questions.
Well, I'll start because I'm full of questions, obviously. First, very interesting that they're all vinified separately depending on where they're coming from. Is the age range still the same? Kind of those younger, like average 10-ish year vines. One, what happens to the wine that's vinified that doesn't go into Mascot of the younger vines? And 2, how often on these plots are they replanting it to what percentage?
Yeah, great questions. So answering your first question, yes, the average age is 9 years of the vines in the Mascot, and that is pretty consistent across property. It actually varies a bit by plot within the property and when we're replanting. Certain plots, if we happen to have replanted that area, we think will be ready a little bit earlier. If they're, for example, like southwest facing and get a bit more sun, we might find them to be ready earlier. But in general, it's nine years on average across all of the sites. And there is, like I said, a significant amount of wine that doesn't make it into the Mascot. We sell that as bulk wine in a double blind exchange. So people know that they're getting fruit from a specific area, but not that it's made by the Harlan family. That's pretty traditional in the industry. So there is some fruit that we're selling off that we just don't think is up to the standard that we're looking for the Mascot. And your final question, Can you repeat it? I want to make sure I answer the right
Sure,
question.
yeah, no problem. What percentage of the vineyards are you replanting? And with that, an addendum, what is the max age of, not to get into the other areas, but what type of age are we getting into where you're then deeming them no longer producing the amount of fruit that you're looking for, ripping up and replanting?
Yeah, good question. So we're replanting on average about 1.5% to 2% a year of all of our, and in general, and this kind of is just another way of saying it, we think that the vines, and this varies a bit by plot and site also, but we think that our vines need about 2 replantings a century. So Harlan Estate is the oldest property, first planted in the 80s. So those vines are starting to be replanted as the first ones. The other ways, and Bonds came on in the early 90s, so there's certain ones there that we're replanting as well. In addition to that, we are constantly dealing with some different sites that we're doing experiments on. That's something we take R&D to learn how to make the best wine really seriously. And Promontory has become kind of the home of that for us because it's this 800-acre territory. We have been experimenting with some different plots and styles, and sometimes if the fruit and the expression is what we're looking for, then that can get included in the Mascot as well.
Got it. Great.
So with that replanting schedule, we're looking at 5,000 to 7,000 cases a year is where we expect to be once we stabilize, and we have Promontory coming more into the fold for replanting as well.
Sure. Okay. Great. Thank you.
And I should mention that Promontory was purchased already planted. So there has been a number of replantings. Some of the plots we kept, some we changed. So there's a number of replanting there because it was purchased from another family that was producing wine there.
Sure. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Other questions before we taste some wine? Okay, well, I think we should dive right in. I think the first thing that I'll note as we get into the tasting, what I think is really interesting about tasting these wines is that it's the family's only endeavor where we're actually making a blend from multiple sites in Napa. So they're very distinct, unique sites that the Harlan family has, spent 50 years identifying, and we think are some of the finest sites in the valley. And so, as opposed to having this be an expression of one particular place, which is really what the family is trying to do with their single vineyard wines, this is really more about an expression of the vintage. So the wines change from year to year. There is an expression, I think, an approach that you can see that's similar because it is from these same sites, but the blend will change each year. 2013 may have more Promontory than 2015, which may have a bit more Harlan Estate. It's really about what the vintage gives us and trying to make the best expression of Napa. So it's exciting to do verticals because it's pretty dynamic, and it can show us how we're changing our approach year to year. The next thing to note before we start tasting is that this wine is almost 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. It's about 90%. Harlan Estate is the only one of the components that isn't 100% Cab. It's a traditional Bordeaux blend with Merlot and Cab Franc and Petit Verdot. So depending on how much Harlan Estate younger fruit gets into it, we do have a bit of those expressions in the wine as well. And sometimes that can be 2%, sometimes it can be 10. It's another reason why the wine evolves a bit year to year. So let's start with 2013. I like to go kind of oldest to youngest when I do these. Like I said, I've not done the 4 side by side, so I'm really excited to tell you about all 4 of these. I'll talk a little bit about the growing season and then a bit about the wine. So for those of you who know 2013, I'm actually going to give it a quick swirl and taste before I dive in. Yeah, so for those who know about 2013, it was within a drought period in Napa. So the vines were already going through some adversity. We were in the 2nd year of pretty intense drought. But drought, and sometimes if it's not too many years in a row, can really reveal strength. And I think that's what happened with this wine. It required the younger vines to work a bit harder to get to their water source. and to express the fruit. The fruit was a bit more concentrated that year because of it. There were well-formed, smaller, denser berries than we've seen in other years. And there was also large bouts of wind in that year that added some thickness to the skins and added some darker expressions to the wine. So it's known as a strong year in Napa. Traditional Napa Cab lovers love 2013. It's a bit of a darker expression, darker fruit, a bit more of a tannic backbone. We think it's probably the most ageable of the 4 wines that we're looking at now. Across Napa, it's known as a wine that'll, can be 50-year plus wine. And one of the things that I really think is unique about this wine is just the depth of tannin that you get is something that I think is not as traditional from the Mascot. And when we compare it to the 14, you'll see that like the younger vines a lot of times don't have this depth of tannin. We think they're actually a little bit more approachable younger because of that. But the 13, even with these vines of 9 years, to me, this drinks like a wine that's coming from vines that have been around for 30 years, really has that depth of character. And it's a really, I think, traditional expression of a really good year in Napa. I should mention that we age these wines for 5 years before we release them, with the goal of having them be ready to drink when you get them. So we are on our 2016 release, which I'll talk through in a minute. But the 13 was on the 5-year release cycle, and we've been tasting it, since we've got it out. I think the 13 is drinking in a really beautiful place right now. I'll be interested to get people's feedback on the 3. But even with the 5 years of aging on 13, when it was in bottle and we released it, it was pretty tightly wound. You could feel the tannin. It had a little bit more heat. I think it's opened up a bit over the 5 years since, and I think now is a pretty beautiful time to be drinking it. We just had it. We had a big prime rib event that we had 2 weeks ago, and we decided to open the 13. We thought it would go best with the kind of stronger meats. So one of my favorites.
Anthony, there was a question from Jeff actually, who was asking how you all determine the blend. So what goes into the blend?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was just participating in my first session not too long ago, so it was one of the best parts of the job. It's led by our director of wine growing, Corey Empting, and he's the director of wine for everything the Harlan family does. Harlan Estate, Blondam, Promontory. So it's led by him, and Will and Bill are there as well, giving their input, as well as our winemaking team, a few members from the various estates. I was able to be there this last year. So we're really looking at each individual barrel, which comes from a specific plot, or in the case of Harlan Estate, it's already been blended of the different varietals. But it's this younger fruit that there's already some decisions that have gone into selection. So what goes into each barrel is based on what we think is going to be the best expression of that vintage based on the berries and other factors. So we taste each barrel, decide if we think the barrel is good for inclusion, and then start blending things together really in real time to look for what we think is the best expression of those 3 together. So sometimes it could be, like I said, a third across Bond, Harlan Estate, and Promontory. Other times we might think that Promontory is expressing really well and have it be more than 50% Promontory. So there's no rules. We have all of this in front of us, and then we do it all in real time while we're tasting.
Great. And what is the normal oak usage for Mascot?
Yeah, so again, the Mascot is inheriting the wines that are made in the expression of each estate. So it's actually not our own oak, selection. We're inheriting what has been taken and what is the winemaking practices of the 3 parent properties. So in Harlan Estate, it's all French oak, 50% neutral, 50% new. Similar for Bond. In the case of Promontory, because it's this rugged territory, and we thought it had a pretty it has some tension, that wine. I'm not sure if anyone here has had Promontory. It's a lovely wine, but it has some tension to it. And we wanted to we didn't want to get rid of that tension. We think it's what makes the wine really special, but we wanted to also not overpower that with oak, and we wanted to let it kind of get neutral on its own. So we actually use these larger Austrian casks for aging and have less oak expression. We do use some barrels as well, but not as much wood on that wine. So we take what we're given in that style, and then after blending, we do put it back in fully neutral oak for 6 to 12 months.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make sure I bring up the chat here so I can see it. Yeah, ideal drinking window for 2013. The 2013 is going to age for 30 plus years. I'm confident of it. I think it's drinking as well as it's been drinking right now. I don't know that it'll stay that way forever. You know, these wines can have their peaks and valleys, but I think right now is a pretty beautiful time for it. But you could lay it down for a few decades and it would be ready to go in 2040.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So moving to 2014. So 2014 is a really interesting year. It was the earthquake year in Napa, which some people may remember. It was a significant earthquake. We were on our third drought year. I mentioned that 2013 was a drought year. 2014 was again a drought year. And it's kind of known in winemaking, Corey has explained this to me, that like a third year of drought in Napa is when you can start getting problems. There's not the same berry development that you'd expect. You can get less yield and over ripening because the berries are small and dense because they're not getting enough water nutrition. So we were getting pretty worried about the 2014 vintage as we were getting into the end of the summer, because it just hadn't had drought earlier, hadn't had rain earlier in the year, and weren't getting any into summer, and it was looking like it was going to be a really difficult vintage. Then we had this earthquake on towards the end of August, and our properties are all these hillside properties where our vines are, and on these properties, the water plate beneath us is actually pretty deep because we're up on these hillsides. When the tectonic plates shifted from this large earthquake, the water level rose, and all these creeks that go through the property started flowing. And this was all of kind of throughout Napa, there was this big resurgence, I guess, of water coming to the vines because of this water plate rising that brought really needed nutrition to the wines. So just when we thought it was going to be a really difficult year, these streams started flowing all the way through end of August through picking, and it actually became a pretty bountiful year. And it's a year where it kind of, I think you can feel the freshness that came at the end of the vintage. It's a softer wine. So let's taste it. Yeah, to me, it's much more red fruit. It has a bit more of a European style to it, in my opinion, a little bit less tannin presence, higher acidity, really good freshness. I think this comes from that kind of intense beginning of the vintage, and then these streams that flew continuously. It was really the year where we had the most constant water supply to the vines in a period when you normally wouldn't have it. So that allowed us to pick a little bit later. Ripening was very smooth. And I think you can kind of feel that freshness and lightness that came from these streams in the wine. So I'm going to encourage everyone to do, side by side as you go. I think you can really tell the difference between the 13 and the 14 and see how, the way that we're approaching the wine can really change based on what the vintage gives us.
Quick question regarding irrigation and farming. It's a little off topic, but I mean, you're bringing up that there's definitely an issue with the droughts and all of those things. Do the vineyard sites, granted they're all spread out and everything, but it sounds like they might be dry farmed. And what type of kind of viticultural practices are being implemented throughout the different vineyard sites?
Yeah, really good question. So you're exactly right that every single one of our properties is dry farmed. It hasn't always been that way, but that's something we've been moving towards, and we're now at. Corey, that's a big, our director of wine growing, that's a big push that he made, with the feeling that with the correct farming practices and cover croppings, that we could really give the vines what they need, maintain the water that is natural and we get in the winter by developing this really complex ecosystem of cover cropping. And he feels that dry farming is what allows the vines to really take root in a real sense into their place. And that's how you get the best expression of a place in a wine. So the cover crop, we do it all without tilling for people who are interested and can dumb out in the farming practice. I think we really do have a very natural practice that is very respectful to the land. So every time we do cover cropping, we do it without tilling. We don't till because we want to maintain the networks of plants and fungi and other things that are already there, as opposed to ripping that stuff up and starting fresh. We never want to do that. So we're always trying to build on what we have. Another thing that we do that I think is pretty interesting is that we entrust the people on our team who are in the vineyard. We have a program called Vine Masters, where people in the vineyard have to study a piece of land for 8 years under the direction of our director of wine growing. And after those 8 years of apprenticeship, they take ownership over a plot of planted vineyards that they call their own, and they're entrusted to lead the farming practice under the direction of Corey. So you can imagine these people who have, one plot that could be, less than 1,000 vines that they've worked 8 years on, and then will stick around and actually own that and really grow to understand what each plot of land needs. So while it's dry farming everywhere, we entrust, there's some flexibility for the vine master who's really learned that land to make some changes or do what they think is best to get the expression of the land.
Great. And we have one other, Jeff is chiming in again. Thank you, Jeff. Asking about what style of stemware that you would recommend, and does it matter?
Well, I'm gonna pin Jeff and see what he's what they have there. I can't tell, but now I'm gonna put him up there. I think for wines that have a lot of character, and if you want to understand the character in the best way, I think glasses do matter. I don't think there's necessarily one style of glass that you have to have. We happen to really have taken to these Zalto glasses. These are Zalto Bordeaux glasses that we think, more so than it does help aerate the wine, but more so it's really on the nose that we think you get the best expression through these wider glasses. And so we use Zalto for everything that we do here. I think what's most important is to get a high quality large glass that's meant for a Bordeaux or a Cab, and you can generally get the best expression from those. I don't know.
Is it well, sorry, I know I'm breaking protocol here, but we've broken bread before, so I feel I can ask you a direct question. But if you're doing a vertical tasting and you have different glasses, I imagine that could potentially alter the tasting, no? I mean, everyone uses the same glasses. Everything is consistent except for the wine. And, Riedel does an incredible marketing job about, stemware matters. Everything is different. They do the test with water, but what's your view on that? Does it really
I agree. I think if you're going to do a vertical tasting, you should have at least similar glasses to get the same, keep it apples to apples. That's what I'm doing here. That's what we do with all of ours. So I would keep that consistent in a vertical tasting. Other questions before we move to 2015?
And just encouraging everyone else, please chime in with questions and or comments, we'd love to hear from them. So don't be shy.
Yeah, definitely. Also want to know what people think about the wine. We can ask that at the end too, but always interested in that. Okay, moving to 2015. So the 2015 is actually our current release. We are tasting 2016 today, really as a treat to the group. We are soon to release the 2016, but this is actually for the 16 will be the first time me tasting it with a group. So I'm excited about that. So the 15 is our current release until the beginning of July. And the 15 growing season is, again, quite different than either of the two. So I mentioned kind of 13 drought year, but the second year of drought when it required some strength from the vines that I think shows in the strength of the wine. 14 was this flood year with this constant kind of fresh water supply that I think shows in the freshness of the wine. 15 was a very uncommon year. It was very cool and cloudy in the beginning of the year. It wasn't a drought year, but it wasn't a ton of rain. But more than anything else is it was very cool and cloudy. We didn't get the heat that we normally get in the beginning of the growing season that helps develop larger clusters and really get us to a bountiful vintage. So it was the beginning of the year that we knew that it was going to be a smaller vintage. We were seeing smaller clusters, berries weren't developing, we weren't getting some of the heat that we were looking for to help bring that maturation of the berries. And it was interesting. It was the vintage between the beginning of the year in kind of the early years, months of the year, from the beginning of the cool and cloudy to the heat of summer. It was the biggest contrast in temperature that we've seen of any vintage over the past 15 years. So it was this vintage of contrasts. It was cool and cloudy in the beginning, and then it got very hot. We had intense heat kind of from the summer, but not only the summer, it really lasted all the way into the fall. And so it was a wine that people didn't really know what to expect from. Was it going to express itself from the cool beginnings, or was it going to be this kind of hotter vintage? Because of the heat spikes that lasted into the fall, it's a vintage where most producers, us included, picked very quickly. There was some fear about it getting over ripening. We were expecting temperatures to fall as we got into September and October. We didn't see that. So people who didn't pick really quickly have an expression of kind of some hotter, over-ripened wines. We were picked as soon as we saw that temperatures weren't going where we thought they would. And I think because of that, I feel like this wine is kind of a tale of two different parts of the vintage. I have a harder time really nailing down, honestly, how I explain the wine. To me, it on the nose, it has its chilly beginnings. I think it kind of has this cool radiancy to it on the nose, and you're expecting a wine that might be a little bit more like the 2013. I do think it has more 2013 characteristics, but when on the palate, I think you get a bit more of that kind of, I don't want to say hotter expression, but an expression of fruit that you would get from a hotter vintage. To me, it's most interesting to compare this to the 13. Like if you look at the 13 on one end of the spectrum of a maybe more traditional Napa Cab with darker fruit and bigger tannins, and the 14 maybe is more of a fresher European expression, I think the 15 falls somewhere in between. I think it has elements of both, probably leans more towards the 13 of a vintage that's probably more traditional Napa Cab, but it does have this interesting, just like the vintage was interesting, I think, kind of tension between nose and palate that you don't see often. And so we think this is a pretty unique wine. From people that I've talked to when I've led tastings like this, I think, people feel like it's a bit more of a traditional Napa expression, contrasting to the 14 more so than the 13. I'm interested to hear what people think.
I'll jump in quickly. One of the things that I noticed about the 15 that stood out with me when it was first released, when I was tasting it, and it holds true today. Mascot to me has always been one of these wines that I've always found to be super approachable and on the softer, quote unquote, side of things. And I think this is going to touch on Jeff's question, and then we can go from there with that. But the 2015 vintage for me was the first one that I tasted that I was like, I actually asked, I remember asking the question, oh, did the winemaker change? Oh, were there? And I started asking all these technical questions of like, oh, what changed? Because to me, there's a disjunctness, not in a bad way, but where you have the older vintages of Mascot, which kind of lean, to your point, kind of like a right bank style of Bordeaux. It's a little softer. It's a little more approachable. You might argue that there's more Merlot in it, but not knowing, but like you might guess that. Whereas like 15 is kind of slapping you in your face saying, this is Napa Cab, like tried and true, unapologetically. So it's interesting that, and you're saying it's just solely based off of the diurnal shift and that juxtaposition between temperatures.
Yeah, I think it required us to pick a little bit more quickly than we normally would. We like to, and we've really trained I wouldn't say trained, we've learned our land to know that we can get these vines that will reach kind of the bricks we're looking for and acidity and tannins very slowly. And we've been able to pick a bit slower and look plot by plot to where we think we're getting to that ideal level. 15 at the end of the vintage kind of hit everybody in the face a little bit. It wasn't getting cooler. There was risk of very hot, over-ripened wines. And maybe you see a touch of that with what you're saying is like we didn't get this natural coolness that helps balance and soften the wine. That being said, it's a really well-regarded vintage in Napa, and what I've found is traditional cab lovers, Napa cab lovers, take to this wine. To me, of the three we've had, it's not my top of the three. I'll be honest about that. It does express a little bit of what 13 had when we released it, and 13's, you give it a bit of time and that softness comes. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get there, but I agree with everything you're saying, and it really was what the vintage gave us. Interesting.
And then Jeff asked about ABV levels. So he's wondering if the Mascot being the Bordeaux style, Bordeaux being lesser ABV traditionally, California being higher cabs. Do you guys have a set range that you try to aim for? Is it do you do a lot of work in the cellar to obtain that, or is it all? Do you just kind of pick a picking point where you can kind of judge by the bricks and make that happen?
We certainly aren't manipulating it. We have a point when we think the wine's ready, and we get a resulting ABV from that. Napa wines are going to be traditionally higher alcohol just because of the climate here compared to Bordeaux, where it tends to be a little bit cooler in the beginning of the growing season. They probably do traditionally pick a little bit earlier than we do in Napa. ABV is not something that we're thinking about. We're thinking about how do we make the best wine that we think we can express in the land, and the ABV results. I will say that 2017 and 2020, the fire years, were the earliest picks of our in the history of our wine growing endeavor. 2020 being the earliest ever. We're one of the few that made a wine in 2020. Our winemaker made the decision to pick everything before the second fire. So the first fire was very far north and maybe affected one or two of the bond crews. We're still learning that, but everything else was not affected further south. So we picked the earliest by far we've ever picked in the 2020 year. Our winemaker had a premonition there'd be a second fire, and he was right. So it will be a very interesting year for us to see how that expression is. We've been working in that direction because we think our vines are reaching maturity a bit earlier. We want to keep really bright acidity. So you'll probably see the lower alcohol wines in those years, but that's a result of what nature gave us, not what we're working towards.
Awesome. Any other questions from anyone out there? Chime in.
Hey, Anthony, how are you? Will Small, nice to meet you. And Daniel, good to see you. Thanks so much for organizing. Just wanted to say, I think the wines are excellent. Really, really like them all. To me, I think the 14 is just beautiful. It's really approachable and soft and velvety on the palate. I think the 13 as well, but still it's quite structured, still tannic. I think you're making some comments on that earlier. And then 15, I kind of agree with Daniel's remarks earlier. It's a little bit more of what we typically expect in, more dense, structured Napa Cab.
Yeah.
But really love them all. And actually, I have a few bottles of 15 here, and looking forward to purchasing the 16 when it's released. So big fan of your wine. Thanks so much for hosting.
Yeah, great. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
You bringing the wines. Well, I think that's a good.
One question I did have was on how, because obviously Bond and Promontory and Harlan, they all have, I guess Promontory now has the second label, I forget, penultimate, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe you wouldn't call it that, but
don't call it the second label.
Or the younger vines. How is the sorting done vis-a-vis those labels versus the Mascot? What is the process like in blending, and how I understand the Mascot's a blend of all three of those different vineyards and is weighted towards the younger vines, but how do you think through that kind of sorting process?
Yeah, good question. So it's actually fairly simple. Nothing of less than 12 years, and it tends to be 15 years actually, goes into the first or second wines. So all of that fruit before the Mascot was being sold, we Will and Corey saw that we could make a really great wine from, maybe didn't have the same sense of place, which is why we're blending it, but still make a really great wine from the younger vines. But none of those ever go, those younger vines have traditionally or will really ever go into the first or second wines of the individual estates. So penultimate, for example, is wines that kind of plots or barrier or sections that weren't deemed to be quite ready for Promontory, but still a great expression. So you can think of the first and second wines of the estates more of a selection across the best plots of those estates, but they're never including the younger vines. So the younger vines are all up for us for the Mascot, and then we take those, use some of them to make the Mascot, and then sell some off.
Yeah, got it. Well, they're all great wines and big fans of what you guys do. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you. So am I. I'm only a year in, so I'm still excited to be doing this stuff. So
I have a really geeky question I'm going to ask, and you may or may not know it. But what type of liter to hectoliter harvesting does, or ton to gallon thing, depending on which conversion you want. What is traditional across the Harlan Estates?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, and we don't really answer it, mostly because it changes.
Okay.
And so I have wanted to answer the question. Generally, because it changes of what the vintage gives us, what I can say is that we are always looking to make the finest expression of the land, and that includes, not using everything that's given to us.
Sure.
So it's a low yield, always has been, and will continue to be, but we don't have an exact number we quote because it changes often.
Got it. Thanks.
Good question, though. I'll get to an answer at some point. We'll figure that one out. The final vintage, let's get to 2016. And I mentioned before that this wine actually isn't released to the market yet. We'll be doing our offering on June 8th. So if people are interested in that, you can sign up and on mascotwine.com, and it'll be available, I'm sure, at some point at the Battery. But this is a wine that's coming soon. I thought it'd be fun to preview it with this group. I really like this wine. I think, again, that what's so fun about this vertical tasting is that it allows you to see that we really are taking what the vintage is giving us. We don't have anything in mind when we're making a wine other than how we can make the best expression of the vintage, and that can come out differently year to year. So I think seeing the differences kind of between these wines can be really exciting. So let's talk about 2016 a little bit. The first thing to note about 16 is that it was kind of what people would call an iconic year in Napa. You'll hear this about the vintage in general. It was a very idyllic growing season. So we got the right amount of rain in the beginning of the year, really kind of abundant rainfall compared to the prior years, which is what really sparred this larger vintage. But really temperate weather. It was like Corey explains it as the easiest year since he's been making wine, because we were able to just let nature do its thing, and it gave us kind of everything that we felt was necessary to make a great wine. It was a bit of a kind of Indian summer. It didn't get as hot in the summer as it normally does. And especially in these hillside properties, there was a layer of fog that continued coming through into August that normally we don't see. So we didn't get the same spikes of heat that we normally get. And actually, especially in Promontory, which sits in its own little canyon, it stayed cool really throughout, and we didn't get spikes of heat. So it's a year when we were able to pick a bit later because we didn't get those spikes of heat. We were able to get what we wanted out of the tannins to get structure, but at the same time, able to get the acidity and brightness really high because we were able to leave the grapes on the vines a bit longer without having to worry about over ripening. So it was an idyllic year, and I think it made an idyllic wine. Now, keep in mind, this is a younger wine than the other wines we've tried. It's not even out yet, but we're getting there. But to me, it's a wine that shows kind of elegance and beauty in a way that maybe the others haven't. I think these other wines are beautiful too, but I think something about the brightness and acidity and balance with the tannins, to me, kind of marks a next kind of a new expression of the land that we haven't showed before. I'm not sure if I'd like to hear what people think about the wine.
I'll agree that I find this wine to be, of the lineup, though there are like very unique and wonderful characteristics of the other three, this one seems to be the most harmonious in terms of like fruit, tannin, structure, all of those things. It all kind of comes together. It's almost like, and not that this is what happened, but it's almost like if the other three were building blocks to make the 16, it's like finally it all kind of came together, and there's this like wonderful intertwining of the other three wines in their own beautiful way to really make it what it is. I mean, I've been a huge fan of these wines for many years. I've enjoyed selling them and having them here, so it's been great. And it's great to, like you, I haven't done a vertical of this ever. Yeah. So it's super interesting to kind of dissect it and geek out on it a little bit. But the 16, when I tasted it, and again, it's young, but I think it just shows so many of the amazing facets of the wines and what they have to offer, and what we can expect in another 3 to 6 years where this wine will be. Yeah. I think this is going to be much more akin to that of the 13 than any of the others, but then I think with another extra layer on top of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally agree with that. And I say, and Will and Corey always say this, and I actually, it was hard for me to believe before I joined, and now I guess I believe it, that I do think we're making better wine every year. We're still in the kind of infancy, if you compare us to Burgundy or Bordeaux, of understanding the lands, certainly understanding the younger vines, and our practices are always changing. So I think 16 really is a culmination of us being given, Mother Nature being kind, us incorporating what we've learned about these younger vines. And I think you'll see this kind of expression and understanding and the harmony, really. I think it's harmonious and elegant in a way that we've kind of been able to capture as we've learned more about it in terms of the balance between structure and tannin and acid and brightness. And I think that's really what we have to come in the coming years of the Mascot too.
I think the unique aspect to the Mascot wines, and this is just me thinking about this, is like my predecessor, Christoph, who all of you know, you know, when we talk about young vines, and he talks about just the way this is what I'm looking for, the vivacity, right, behind these young vines, and the tension and the eagerness to grow and survive and thrive, that often get blended in and give a balance to a lot of other wines. Whereas this is kind of capturing that energy and that excitement. And that's kind of interesting, and kind of how I've always felt about the Mascot is these vines are so young. They're looking to survive, and they're looking to grow, and they're looking to reproduce, really. I mean, let's be honest, right? Like, that's what their job is to do. And then you're capturing all of that energy and that tension, which I think is super unique and something that no one else is doing. So you know, and I think it kind of shows through with this lineup, that underlying tension and energy that's there, which makes these wines, to me, super unique and interesting.
Interesting. I appreciate that. I'm going to relay that to the team here, I think, really eloquently put.
Well, go ahead. Sorry, pardon me.
What's interesting to me is the 16 seems quite developed in a way that I wouldn't necessarily have expected, and it has some of the tertiary notes that the 13 has, but I don't really get yet in the 15 or the 14, which is just a little bit softer and fumed. But I really like it. I mean, it's probably they're all good, but it might even be my favorite. Maybe not to drink today, but I think it has a lot of promise.
Yeah, agreed. I think you the way you explained it is kind of how I think about these wines. I like to, you know, like I think of the 14 as the charming one, the 13 kind of as the wise one that's developed. The 15 is really the unknown to me, and the 16, as I've said before, is kind of elegance and potential. So I agree with it.
So we got to buy the 16.
Yeah, coming soon.
When it comes out. And I will say for that, this is totally a sneak peek for all of you. It is not on the list, and I will I let everyone know we honor what the winery wants to do and how they want it to be released, and so it is not on our list until after the official release date. So just in case anyone is coming in looking for it, it's not there yet. In a couple months, we'll have it listed. So
we'll be patient, Daniel.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. It was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions out there, Jeff? I'm sure you have one or two more. And thank you. We love questions.
All right, if no other
questions. Hey,
we do have something.
Amazing to see you. Sorry, it took me a while.
We gotta catch up.
I'm like fumbling with the mute button. So great to see you.
Yeah.
I had no idea how incredibly knowledgeable you are, and it was so fun. I mean,
wines were amazing.
Everyone said, here, I'll give you the, I don't know, is this battery inappropriate? I don't know if you do this, but you know.
I think you were
I had no idea you were doing this. My God.
Yeah, it was time to get back to my passion. So I love doing this.
You look great. I think the last time I saw you was Vegas, right?
I know, indeed.
And we're not going to talk about that. But
yeah,
good to see you.
We can talk afterward, but good to see you.
All right, buddy. Thank you. It was really amazing. The wines were incredible. And
awesome. Thank you.
Super fun to learn about.
Yeah, for sure.
Your passion. So,
thank you.
Cheers.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. And Anthony, thank you so much. Truly appreciate you walking us through the vertical and sharing your knowledge of the estate and the wines. And thank you, everyone who joined today. we can't wait to have you to do this in person, which we're hopefully going to do very soon. So we'll do something of the ilk, you know, in the near future. So keep your eyes open and stay safe out there. We're excited to be opening up more and more and look forward to seeing you here at the Battery. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Have a great night.